Hope you're having an amazing day. Today, we're following Linda as she climbs the freezing mountain to pick fruit, buy wild produce, and build a better life. Until that sudden, unbelievable profit turns her normal routine into a turning point she never saw coming. If you enjoy the dawn hadn't fully arrived yet, but Linda was already awake. A thin layer of fog clung to the mountain like a blanket, soaking the roof with cold dew. She tied her hair up, slipped into a thick jacket, and checked her gear out of habit. Woven basket, small knife, gloves, a roll of twine, and her little notebook with messy numbers scribbled across the pages. Outside, the air smelled like wet soil and wood smoke from faraway houses. The path up the slope was slick with fallen leaves, but Linda walked it like she'd walked it 100 times. Slow, careful, sure. She reached her garden first. Dua gang vines stretched low across the ground, their fruit turning from pale green to a warm yellow that meant they were ready. She tapped a melon gently, listening for that dull, ripe sound. Nearby, wild long-gone trees swayed, their clusters heavy and sweet-smelling. And deeper into the brush, berries glowed red like tiny lanterns. Linda worked quietly, picking only what was worth carrying down. The best fruits went into one sack. The smaller ones she separated. Those could be dried, turned into jam, or traded for something else later. Nothing was wasted up here. Nothing could be. As she harvested, she counted in her head. Bags, rope, fuel, chicken feed, lime powder for the coop, maybe a roll of netting to block wind. Her notebook came out again. Quick notes, quick math. A tiny pause when she saw how the numbers were finally starting to look hopeful. When the sun rose higher, Linda headed down toward the village trail. By late morning, the small gathering point near the crossroads was already alive. Farmers arrived with their baskets and sacks. Wild, long gone, forest fruit, cassava roots still dusty, and bundles of melons that looked like they carried the warmth of the mountain inside them. Linda didn't shout. She didn't act like a boss. She greeted each person with a nod and a smile, set up her scale, and began weighing patiently. Every kilogram counted. Every note in her book matched the money in her hand. She paid clearly, fairly. No tricks. No, I'll pay you later. No forcing their prices down until they had nothing left. An elderly man watched her for a while, then chuckled softly. "You're young, but you've got a good heart," he said. "The mountain sees that." Linda smiled, a little embarrassed, and kept writing. Then her phone vibrated. A message from CEO Quang. "Eat something, okay? And don't climb too high today." Linda's lips curved. She replied with a quick, laughing emoji, then sent a short message back. "I'm fine, don't worry. Come home early." She didn't say more, but just that tiny exchange warmed her more than the sun did. Still, business was business. Linda called a contact in the district market, asking about the day's prices. She listened carefully, then glanced at the farmers waiting nearby. If someone tried to squeeze them today, she wanted to be ready. She had just finished tying down the last sack onto the cart when a shadow fell across the ground. A man she'd never seen before stood there. Not from the village, not from the usual buyers. His shoes were too clean, his jacket too neat for mountain work, and the way he held his cigarette told Linda he wasn't here to carry anything, only to take. He smiled like he already knew the ending. "You're Linda, right?" he asked. Linda's fingers tightened slightly around the twine, but her voice stayed calm. "Yes." The man pulled a small laminated sheet from his pocket and held it out like it was an official document. "I'm a new trader," he said. "I buy in bulk. I've got a price list." Linda's eyes scanned it. Her stomach dropped. Just a little. The numbers were low, too low. Low enough to break the farmers if they accepted, and low enough to make Linda look expensive if she refused to match him. He watched her face closely, like he was hunting for fear. "These days, people want cheap," he said casually. "If you pay higher than me, you'll lose profit. If you pay the same as me, you'll lose your farmers." He leaned in slightly, his voice smooth, almost amused. "So tell me," he said, "do you think you can compete?" Linda didn't answer immediately. Behind her, a few farmers had gone quiet. They were listening. They were waiting. Not just for a price, but for whether Linda would stand firm or bend like everyone else. Linda lifted her chin and met his eyes. "I don't compete by crushing people," she said. "If you want cheap goods, go somewhere else." The man's smile didn't fade. It widened. "Brave," he murmured. "But bravery doesn't pay bills." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I know where your supply comes from," he said. "I know which families trust you. If I want, I can turn all of that." Linda's heart beat once, hard, but her face stayed steady. She wasn't going to show fear. Not here. Not in front of them. She tightened the knot on the sack, slow and controlled, like she had all the time in the world. Then she spoke, clear enough for everyone to hear. "This is my way," she said. "Fair weight, fair money. If anyone wants to follow his price, I won't stop you. But if you stay with me, no one will be cheated." The farmers exchanged looks. No one moved. Not yet. The man clicked his tongue softly as if disappointed. "Fine," he said. "We'll see how long your way lasts." He turned to leave, then paused and glanced back at her. "Tomorrow," he said, "meet me at the crossroads. We should talk. Seriously." Then he walked away, disappearing down the path as if he'd never been there at all. Linda stood still for a moment, staring at the spot where he'd been. The mountain wind brushed past her cheek, cold and sharp. And for the first time that day, she felt something she hadn't felt in a while. Not exhaustion, not worry. A warning. By the time Linda reached home, the sky had turned smoky gray, and the mountain air felt sharper than it had in the morning. She stacked the sacks neatly by the door, cassava roots still dusty, melons wrapped to prevent bruises, long and bundled tight. Her shoulders ached, but the weight felt honest. It felt like progress. The yard wasn't quiet anymore. The new chickens were already chirping, impatient and hungry, rushing toward her the moment she appeared. Linda crouched, scattered feed into a shallow tray, and watched them peck with frantic little movements. "Eat," she murmured, half amused. "Grow fast." She checked the coop next. The wind could slip through any careless gap, so she tightened the rope, nudged a board into place, then sprinkled a thin line of lime powder along the ground. Simple protection. The kind of routine that kept small hopes alive. Only after the chickens settled did Linda step into the kitchen. Warmth wrapped around her instantly. She moved with the quiet rhythm she'd built over weeks. Rice washed and set to cook. Ginger crushed, garlic sliced, melon rinsed, soup pot filled. Nothing fancy, just food that made a hard day feel softer. Pork simmered with forest ginger and pepper. Melon sizzled with garlic. A clear bowl of soup steamed gently. Linda set out longan for later, sweet and clean, like a reward at the end of the night. While the pots worked, she opened her notebook. Today's page was crowded with numbers, weights, prices, payments to farmers, fuel, twine, chicken feed. She traced a finger down the column until she reached the final line. Profit. Not a perfect profit. Not the kind that erased every worry, but real enough to make her pause. Linda circled the number once, then again, as if she needed to convince herself it wouldn't vanish the moment she blinked. A sound at the door pulled her from the page. Footsteps. Then the door opened and CEO Quang stepped inside, shaking moisture from his jacket. His face carried the quiet exhaustion of a long day, the kind people hide behind polite smiles and professional voices. But the moment he smelled dinner, his shoulders loosened. He looked at the table, the steam, the small light over the room, and his voice softened without trying. "This," he said, exhaling. "This is the best part of my day." Linda held out a towel. "Then take off your stress and sit down." Quang smiled as he dried his hair, and for a brief moment, the cold mountain outside didn't matter. They ate slowly, side by side, letting silence feel comfortable instead of empty. The food was simple, but it filled the room with something warmer than heat. Quang glanced at Linda more than once. "You're tired," he said gently. "I am," Linda admitted. "But it was a good day." "How good?" he asked, leaning forward. Linda hesitated, then slid the notebook across the table. Quang scanned the page. His eyebrows lifted. He looked again, as if the numbers might change. "You did all this today?" he asked. Linda nodded. "The harvest was strong, and the farmers came. They trusted me." Quang's gaze softened. He didn't celebrate loudly. He didn't turn it into a speech. He simply placed his fingers over hers, steady and warm. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because you made money, because you did it the right way." Linda's throat tightened. She looked down quickly, pretending to focus on her bowl. "We can buy more chickens," she said, a little too fast. 10 more, maybe more, if the price is fair." Quang gave a quiet laugh. "So this is the plan now? Build a chicken empire?" "A quiet empire," Linda replied, and the corner of her mouth finally lifted. "One egg at a time." After dinner, Quang stood and gathered the dishes. Linda reached out automatically. "I'll do it." He shook his head. "You carried the mountain today. I can carry plates." He started washing. Water ran. Ceramic clinked softly. The sound was ordinary, so ordinary it felt like a miracle. Linda stepped outside to check the coop once more. The chickens had settled into a tight, sleepy cluster, their tiny bodies rising and falling with soft breaths. Linda adjusted the cover, then turned toward the dark tree line. That was when her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Her chest tightened, and she already knew. She stared at the screen for a second too long before answering. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. "Linda," the man said. "Good. You picked up." Linda kept her tone even. "What do you want?" "A serious talk," he replied lightly. "Tomorrow, the crossroads." "I'm not interested," Linda said, a soft chuckle. "You're interested in keeping your business alive, aren't you?" Linda's fingers curled around the phone. "Don't threaten my people." "I don't need to threaten anyone," the man said. "I only need to offer them a better deal, or plant the right rumor. Trust is fragile, Linda. It breaks faster than a scale." Linda's eyes flicked to the window. She could see Quang moving inside, still unaware, still peaceful. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. The man's voice lowered, smooth and sharp at the same time. "Lower your prices. Sell through me, or step aside." "And if I don't?" Linda asked. A pause, just long enough to feel like a hand closing around her throat. "Then tomorrow," he said, "things may go wrong. A buyer might cancel, a scale might malfunction, a coop might get unlucky." Linda's stomach turned. She said nothing. The man exhaled like he was bored. "Bring your CEO if you want. I'm curious what kind of man thinks he can protect you forever." Then the call ended. Linda stood frozen in the cold, staring at the dark screen in her hand. didn't want to ruin the night. She didn't want to pour fear into the small, safe space they'd built. But keeping it inside would only let it grow. "There's a new trader," she said. "He showed up at the crossroads today." Quang's posture straightened. What did he do? Linda told him everything. His low price list, his smile, his careful threats, the call just now. Quang didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He listened with a stillness that was far more dangerous than anger. When Linda finished, Quang turned off the faucet. The kitchen became quiet. He set the towel down slowly, then walked to the door and looked out into the night as if he could see the man hiding in the fog. "No one gets to scare you," Quang said, voice low and hard. "Not here." Linda swallowed. "He's trying to control the farmers, and he knows how to make it look like I'm the problem." Quang turned back to her. His eyes were steady, not panicked. "Then we don't let you stand there alone," he said. Linda's heart beat once, heavy. "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow," Quang said, "we go to the crossroads together." He stepped closer, speaking like he was making a promise, not just to Linda, but to the mountain itself. "We'll find out who he really is," he said, "and we'll make sure he understands something clearly." Linda held his gaze. Fear was still there, but it was no longer lonely. Outside, the wind pressed against the house, whispering through the trees. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the trader was already expecting her to come alone.